Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank you for joining our webinar today. We'll be discussing data, trust, and transparency, a key weapon in marketing effectiveness. And my name is Larissa Bedgood. I'm the VP of Marketing over here at V12. And before we get started, a couple of notes. We will be taking Q&A in the last portion of the presentation today. You can go ahead and enter your questions at any point, and then we'll also do a call for questions as we start to wrap up. I'll also be recording the presentation, so be on the lookout for that tomorrow afternoon. And if you'd like a copy of the deck, just let me know, and I'd be happy to shoot that on over to you. So with that, let's go ahead and get started, and I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Anders Ekman, President of V12.
Thank you, Larissa. Hello, everybody. We appreciate your time today. And as all of you know, because you're interested in data, advertising, marketing communications overall has sort of changed radically over the last 5 years to be really fueled by data. And in the first stage, and I think we're entering the second stage now, which our guests will talk to you about. In the first stage, just being able to convert offline identities to online identities and to fuel this new thing called programmatic advertising, whether that be display or now even television or things like that, that was enough. Data was a commodity. And over the last few years, you've certainly seen a lot of marketers become increasingly uneasy at their lack of knowledge or lack of visibility into whether the data that they were buying was any good. Where did it come from? Does it do what it says it's going to do? Because if you go into a programmatic platform, let's say, and you pick a segment, or even you go to somebody for a custom audience, there's still this guesswork at some level that happens around where the data came from and is it any good. So we've always been kind of interested and focused on the topic, and are fortunate today to be joined by Scott McKinley, who is the founder and CEO of Truthset, who has embarked on this mission, this journey to add a level of transparency, level setting, and visibility for marketers into the mysterious data equation. Now that marketers are really getting focused on this issue, it is great to have Truthset out there in the ecosystem and to partner with them. So joining me for the discussion with Scott is Michelle Taves, who's V12's Chief Product Officer. Hello, Michelle.
Hello, happy to join you.
And Scott, if I could put you on the spot a little bit, I think people would be interested not only in Truthset, which you'll get to in a second, but your background and what led you to founding the company.
Yeah, thanks, Anders. Happy to join you guys. It is a mission, without question. I spent, I don't know, something like 20 years, I think probably like most of us on the phone, trying to figure out how to make marketing work better. And as you pointed out, that's mostly been around using data to drive more precise predictions of who might be receptive to a given message. And at Nielsen, I spent a lot of time evaluating pretty much every component of this new data ecosystem. And what we found there was that while the machines, the engines that people were building, the DSPs, SSPs, DMPs, and now CDPs, now all these machines and engines were really good. I mean, this is just code that's built to ingest data, process it, and then spit out some kind of an action in support of a use case. The machines were good, but as we got better and better at testing the outcomes, we realized there was another problem, which is, as you pointed out, the quality of the fuel source. And this happened enough where I finally said, look, somebody has got to stand up and offer some kind of a score or a rating service for the quality of the fuel. Just as you wouldn't drive up to a gas station today and fill up your car from a pump that didn't have an octane rating on it because you don't know what's in it, right? That's what we're trying to do for data. We're trying to build a standardized metric that allows buyers and sellers to qualify the accuracy of the data being used. And it's a really interesting mission. It's quite fun to create something new, and we think that it's going to really raise all boats. We think it's good for the whole ecosystem, and we're really excited to be partnered with V12 as one of the earliest adopters to this new mission around trust and transparency and accuracy of data.
Awesome, thank you, and we will dig into Truthset specifically in just a second. So for those of you that don't know V12, just a quick overview, and this kind of sets up how we've attacked the market and why Truthset and their mission to make data more transparent, more usable for everybody is so important. So with V12, we've built a bit of a modern marketing platform that has 4 components. One is foundational data, everything about every consumer, every household, what they drive, things like that. A really important data foundation for marketers to take advantage of. Who am I talking to? Who do I want to target? What are my customers all about? Michelle and her team have invested an enormous amount of money and time in making that data asset as good as it can be. In addition, newer forms of data we've kind of plugged into our platform over a period of time, and that is all about intent. Really understanding from behavioral data what consumers in particular and businesses are shopping for and interested in the moment. And you link that together with the data foundation, all of a sudden you've got, okay, I know who I want to target and here's what they're interested in. As that data gets more complex, you need an automation platform to help you manage all of the complex data sets that move quickly, the complex interactions and customer journeys that you need to put into market in order to take advantage of all of that data. And that's where our V12 Velocity CDP/marketing automation platform comes in. And then there's the activation part of the equation, which is actually putting programs into market that make the outcome happen. Whether it's display, whether it's email, whether it's direct mail, whether it's television, you've got to take all of this potential and put it into market, and that's what the V12 agency does. So our platform really helps activate the data assets that Michelle and team have painstakingly built over these years. And Larissa, if you'd advance the slide here, Michelle, why don't you tell us about the expanse of the data assets, then we can get into how Truthset plays.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the reasons why we partnered with Truthset and why we're really excited about what they did is because, as you can see, we have quite an expansive list of data assets. And it's really important for us to understand how accurate those data assets are, how accurate the attributes are, because as Scott said, you know, data fuels the engine in a lot of the campaigns that we do for our clients, a lot of the analytics that goes into the solutions that we're creating for our clients. And if that information just isn't correct and it's providing incorrect direction for all that we're trying to do, then it doesn't really provide the value that we want to be able to provide. And so, you know, it's always easy for us as V12 to go and say, hey, we think that our data is really accurate because we do A, B, C, and D. And according to all of our measures and all of our intelligence, right, we believe that we have the most accurate data asset, you know, in the market. However, when we can go and work with an outside partner like Truthset and get additional validation on what we are doing right, along with what we are doing wrong and what we can do better, you know, that really helps us as a company, and it helps us to just be able to provide even better assets for our clients and to improve upon what we're doing. And so we're really excited about the partnership that we've developed and to be part of what Truthset is doing out there. And so if you kind of take a look at the circle that we have, you know, we have our kind of our consumer plus that really kind of sits right in the middle. And, you know, it's the bedrock of everything that we do because everything is really linked across our consumer plus data product. And that is a consumer product that is confidence coded, and it's a complete confidence code system across 1 through 5. And the reason why we do that is because we can actually use that consumer solution across all use cases. There's actually right over 345 million records linked together. And many people ask us, how can we have so many records in our consumer solution? And the reason why is because that solution is actually used for identification, for linkage, for onboarding. So it has many, many use cases beyond just your typical marketing use cases. So obviously, there's more records in there than people in the United States. And so it's confidence coded for postal usage, emailing usage, onboarding, reach, identification, reverse appending. And so we really kind of start with that data asset. And then as you kind of go around the circle, we can link that consumer data product pretty much to all of the different other assets that we have within our solution set. So we are definitely known for auto data. Our auto ID solution is all about vehicles in the garage, which is a VIN data asset. Kind of the cool thing about our auto product is that it is actually at the VIN level, and we have absolutely no marketing restrictions of that data, sourced all through transactional and service data. So 100% through all 50 states, no blackout states, no marketing restrictions, and it's what is actually in the garage at the time of the marketing message. We have about 190 million VINs available today within our data set, and we also have lease data that's also available within that set. We also have business data. We are definitely honed right around more around the contact data than the site data. But considering that we are an ESP, and as Anders talked about, really kind of focusing around deployment and execution, that business contact data is really, really important. Our V12 signals data is all about active shopper in-market intent data, whether it is understanding where people are shopping and where people are going or what people are doing online. We have the ability to take all of that data assets and all of that rich insight and actually tie it to a person. And be able to create activation campaigns off of all of that intelligence. Obviously, we have email data, being able to create execution, reverse append, linkage based upon that email. And that email is actually really important for what Truthset does. And I'm sure that Scott's going to talk about that more in his presentation. And then telematch. Phone numbers are still highly important, being able to understand contactability, especially with COVID. You would really be surprised phone numbers has become a higher important asset, especially over the last 3 or 4 months. Telephone numbers, VoIP phone numbers, and landline phone numbers are still a really valuable asset across the industry today. And then movers, pre-movers, newfound listings, new connect data. And along that, we also have any kind of like lifestyle change data, new intent data, which is highly actionable and highly targetable audiences. So all of this data together also kind of connects into our audience link data, which again, just provides additional execution channels across all of our different data assets. So that's, all of our data assets at a high level, which then feeds into what we actually utilized and partnered to go into our Truthset evaluation. So I think with that, I'm going to pass it down to Scott, and Scott's going to tell you more about their process and all about Truthset.
Cool. So yeah, basically for every data-driven application, by data-driven application, we're really talking about applications and use cases that use record level data, consumer level data to make better decisions, right? So we're going to focus really on marketing, but there's other applications as well, customer analytics, security and fraud. There's actually a host of an increasing number of use cases that enterprises are using that all rely on a record level fuel source, for example, dynamic pricing, personalization, to make better decisions and deliver a more relevant offer or price or whatever it might be to the consumer on the other end. But the problem here is that when you assemble these pools of consumer data to do the thing you want to do, there's error in that data. It's irrefutable, and the error can be as small as 10 or 20 or 30%, and we've seen error as high as 60 or higher percent in certain attributes. And so the problem is that error, you don't see it, and as it flows into your use cases, it often gets expanded, and as wrong as the underlying data source has error that's at least as wrong as the outcome. So when you have records that are incorrect, you're sending them the wrong messages, you're wasting money on them, and you're producing outcomes that are less optimal than if you had more certainty about the types of IDs and the quality of those IDs that you're using for that application. This is the problem with using record level data across these use cases, and why accuracy and the identification of right and wrong records is so important. And just to touch briefly on how this error gets introduced, I mean, nobody can be perfect all the time, right? People move, lines get crossed, IDs get messed up, there's shared devices, shared emails. I mean, there's a million reasons why error can get introduced into a targetable ID pool. And our job really is to let all that happen and then study the resulting ID pool, and then help you as the marketer or use case practitioner to essentially filter out unqualified IDs and improve the performance of all your downstream activities. If you want to flip to the next slide, we're going to go kind of quickly because we're running out of time already. In just the media space, Forrester did a recent study, it's about 8 or 9 months old, that calculated that 21 cents of every media dollar was wasted due to poor data quality. That's a pretty big number. If you flip to the next slide, we'll talk about how that gets introduced in the programmatic ecosystem. When you have data, this is sort of from left to right, when you have source data, so even if you have a perfect data file to start your development of a targetable audience, right? Let's just say new moms, for example. When you pull that data in from wherever you're getting it, you onboard it, you move it into a DMP or a CDP. You might do lookalike modeling to expand that audience because the seed file might be kind of small due to match rates and a variety of other factors. You might push that seed file out to a DSP. You might once again do lookalike modeling. You might even push that out to Facebook or some other walled garden environment. And the point is that as you move that data, which might have been really, really good at source, through this ecosystem, every time you jump from one of these islands to the next island, you lose data and you introduce error, sometimes a lot of error. And that results in a potential compounded error problem of, I mean, theoretically up to 93%. Usually we look at all the way back to a coin flip is what really happens. And that's a problem for everybody, right? It's a problem for the underlying data source who started with really good data, and by the time it gets used, it ends up being, somewhere around half as good as it was when you started. It's bad for the marketer who's looking for extreme performance and precision. That's the promise of direct programmatic one-to-one marketing. And why am I all the way back to might as well flip the coin? So this is the problem we're trying to solve. We can essentially, as Truthset, we can analyze the loss of data and the introduction of error at any insertion point in this flow and help you, the marketer or the SSP or the onboarder, whatever kind of company you're at. If you're moving data from one place to another to achieve some data-driven use case, we can help you make sure that the data is as good as it can possibly be and that you're not wasting money or making incorrect conclusions and decisions based on incorrect records. That's what we do. If you want to flip to the next slide, there's a lot of new research coming out all over the place around the quality of data. This is becoming one of the hottest sort of topics in the marketing ecosystem. Again, it's all around, hey, we did a good job over 20 years building great engines to ingest and process data and support decision making. But again, what about the quality of that data? And there's some really disturbing research coming out. This one from Harvard Business Review determined that in some demographic data was no more accurate than random chance. Like we're right back to flipping a coin, or the famous Wanamaker quote from the 60s, I know that half my advertising works, I just don't know which half, right? And that's no good, right? I think the promise of digital advertising and one-to-one marketing and data-driven everything was supposed to get us better than that. And I think that one of the culprits here is absolutely quality data. So let's talk about how a couple more slides and we'll talk about how we do this. If you go to the next slide. Again, one more, just driving home the pain around this. You have your list of targetable IDs, whether you compose these yourself in a proprietary environment or a DMP or a CDP. Again, you push them through, and the result is lots and lots of error, and that's not optimal for anybody. And again, what we do, and I'll describe how we do it in a second, is identify the records that are wrong and help you remove those records so that you only act and spend money on records that qualify. Go ahead and flip to the next slide. So how do we do it? We are not a data company. We don't pretend to have, just one more data set that we're saying is fantastic. What we do instead is look at everybody else's data. We assemble a sort of a cohort of as many data providers we can get. V12 is one of them. We have many, many more. We add about 2 per week. And what we do is compare everybody's data, right? So let's say we have 11 or 12 providers, all of whom have scaled data around some attribute. For example, an ID might be a hashed email address, and an attribute might be gender. Let's just pick an easy one for gender. We look at agreement rates. We look at underlying evidence for everybody's assertions of truth. We independently score each provider against other independent truth sets to determine how good they are at determining accuracy for that particular attribute. and then we assign a weight to each provider, which is essentially a weight for their vote in the algorithm. And so we run this, we call it a wisdom of the crowds algorithm across all of the data participants. We calculate each provider's weight in terms of how much their vote counts. We check all that against bias adjustment factors and independent truth sets, and we arrive at a score for every single ID that we evaluate. And we have somewhere around 500 million IDs ourselves in Truthset, which represents about 80% of the active hashed email universe in the US. And we assign a probability score from 0 to essentially 0 to 1 that determines how likely that pair is to be true. So if you have a record, which is a ID and a prediction that that's a male or female because you got it from a data provider or you built it from an inference model, you can literally ship us that ID and ask us, how likely is it that this ID is actually female? And we'll return a score of 0 to 1. So 0.9 would be very, very high. That would mean that there's a ton of evidence to suggest that this is female. 0.1 would be very, very low. There's a lot of conflict, disagreement, other evidence that suggests this is not what you think it is. And we take that and apply it to whatever ID pool you might be evaluating. That's how we operate. If you want to go to the next slide. So in the last 12 months since we founded the company, we looked at about 11 data providers, identity and attribute data covering about 1.2 billion IDs, 25 attribute values, and we now have more than 5 billion attribute truth scores. So these again are not, this is not data about people, these are probability scores for everybody else's data, right? So any data provider that let's say you were running an RFP for data providers and you wanted us to tell you who had the best data, the most accurate data for a given attribute that we've scored, we can give you that ranking, right? And we encourage that. It's a really powerful system that finally brings some transparency around how good everybody's data is. And to the point of the V12 executives on the call, the folks who lean into this are going to help make their data better as well. It's a all boats rise kind of proposition. So let's get to, before we run out of time here, let's get to how a couple of the factors about data quality. So when we looked at all this data across all these providers in our first sort of turn of the wheel, we found that even for a demographic attribute like gender, where you think that everybody's probably sourcing from the same providers, there was agreement only half the time, right? And that's because each provider, like a V12 or anybody else in that space, is doing a bunch of stuff to that data to try to make it better. They're adding behavioral data, they're using inference models. So even if there is an underlying source that's broadly used across the data supplier ecosystem, there's a lot of variation among the providers. When we looked at a demographic with more variability like household income, we found that there was only agreement 2% of the time. This means that as a user or buyer of data, you really should understand that the difference between provider 1, provider 2, and provider 3 can be just massive, right? It can be night and day, and that's going to impact the performance of your business in terms of how you're using that data to do your use cases. And finally, when we took 2 vendors, even for household income, we found that there was agreement only 11% of the time. So once again, the story here is there is just wide variability, and it's really, really important for people who use and buy data for all these use cases to understand how each vendor performs and make the right selection based on accuracy, not just scale and price. If you flip to the next slide, case in point here. So this might look like if you were only evaluating data providers, here are 4 of them, against scale, you might pick provider D. But if you use accuracy as well, you might find that provider C has more accuracy, even if they have less scale. And using Truthset, you can even cherry pick the best IDs across multiple providers to assemble the best possible and most accurate pool of IDs. So it's really important to bring accuracy into the evaluation so you don't make mistakes and and basically drive down your performance based on a selection of scale and price only. So yeah, a couple of things that you can do for us just to finish up the sort of explanation of Truthset. So we do ID filtration. This is any ID pool, wherever it rests, we can help you identify which IDs are good, which are not, and allow you to draw the line where you want it in terms of quality versus scale. So you can say, I only want to use IDs that are 90% accurate because I've got a financial services campaign that's super important to be accurate, and we'll help you identify only the ones that are very, very likely to be true. And likewise, you can draw that threshold down to expand your scale, but not at the expense of accuracy. Segment selection, same thing. We can help you pick between providers of different segments to determine which one's the best for your use case. And even data vendor evaluation. If you're comparing vendors for a given attribute and want to evaluate them not just on scale and price, but on accuracy, that's our business. We will do that. There's a lot of services we offer actually for free if you bring new vendors to us, because we want everybody to be snapping to this new world of accuracy, not just scale and price. So when we looked at V12, if you go to the last slide here for me, if you look at V12, it was good that they leaned in. They were literally one of the first who said, you know what, this is good for the industry, it's good for our clients, and it's going to be good for us. Well, it turns out they scored very, very well in many of the core demographics that we evaluated in this first turn of the crank. There were two where they were actually the winner in terms of gender and African American race. If you're looking for that kind of data, V12 has the best data among the data participants that we scored in this first round. So, this is the kind of report that, of course, the data provider loves, because they get to turn around and say, look, independent company, Truthset, very robust and transparent methodology. We objectively scored best in these categories and these segments. And I think what's testament to V12's sort of wisdom and integrity is they are also open to learning where they didn't perform well and make a strategic decision around, gee, this confirms what we've suspected a long time about certain attributes we carry. We can now decide whether to overinvest in them and bring them up to par, or just focus on the ones where we're strongest. But very, very good story for V12 here. I think that the folks on the call who are clients of V12 should be reassured that the data is very good, in some cases the best, and that's the story. So hopefully, I know I kind of rushed here because we are running out of time, but if you guys have any questions about how we operate, how we scored V12, how we score other vendors, how you might use us to improve the quality of your decisions based on all your data-driven use cases, please feel free to reach out to us or V12 so we can answer any questions you might have.
Great, Scott, and it didn't sound hurried, so nice job. That was a lot of effort and a lot of evolution of the company into just a few minutes there. So thank you, Larissa. I know there are a couple of questions that have come in. What do we have?
Yeah, and if anybody needs to drop off, has a hard stop, just a reminder that I will be sending out the recording tomorrow, so be on the lookout for that. But in the meantime, a couple of questions that did come in. Do you have integrations with channels, DMPs, so that Truthset is available, what does that say, off the deck?
Yeah, I mean, you're looking right into our crystal ball of where we're taking the company. We spent the last, as I mentioned, 12 months really building this asset and getting it right, so that we can be transparent and everyone can understand what we're doing. Right now, we operate really on a batch file basis, where wherever a ID pool exists, even if it is in a DMP or a DSP, provided we have access to it, we can do the filtration that I talked about and clean that file up for whatever downstream use case it might have. I think we'll have integrations probably maybe late Q1, Q2 of 2021, probably more like Q2, where a purveyor, a buyer of data or a user of data in a DSP environment like a trade desk or somewhere can select vendors based on whether or not they've been truth scored, right? And even make ID level selections based on the quality that they want to designate for accuracy. So that is on the roadmap. It's more like Q2, I would say, of 2021. Great question.
Great, thanks, Scott. Next question, is there a multi-attribute truth score for each data provider, or are the Truthset truth scores independently reported by attribute?
Yeah, it's great. Another great question. It's encouraging to hear these questions because they're use case questions. Like someone's thinking about actually how might they use this. Yeah, we do compound attributes. They get trickier because you run out of sample essentially. Like you want to make sure you have sufficient overlap to produce a stable and confident score about the accuracy of that segment. So suffice it to say, of the 7 or 8 top demographics, we can do compound attributes for all of those. So if you wanted to do, for example, women and presence of children, or ethnicity and household income, we can do those compound attributes. Just know that the more granular you get, the lower the confidence gets at this point. As we add data providers, which as I mentioned, we're doing every single week, our data asset will grow and we'll be able to get more and more granular in terms of the compound nature of our truth scores.
Great, thank you. And that's all the questions I have right now. So any that you think of later when you get the recording tomorrow, feel free to let us know and we can get your question answered for you. And also just a quick reminder, you may have received the email, but we do have a webinar on Thursday, I believe, on customer data platforms. And that kicks off our CDP webinar series that's going to be running for the next several months. So with that, again, thank you all for joining, and I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you.